Welcome back to another Web Dev podcast episode where we help aspiring developers get jobs and junior developers grow. In this podcast episode, we're going to be reviewing Alchemy Code Lab, whatever you want to call it. I brought on 3 real guests to give their 3 real experiences, and we're just going to dive into things. Like usual, we're going to start with our intros. Paul, we'll start with you. So 3 questions. When did you graduate? What industry did you come from? And what do you do now? Did you land a job or what's going on?
Yeah, so I'm Paul. I graduated Alchemy in February of 2021. My previous industry was wildland firefighting, working for the U.S. Forest Service, and I did find a job pretty much right away after graduating Alchemy, and I'm still working there. I love it there. Thank you.
Awesome. Sounds good. How about you, Cameron?
Hey, Don. Yeah, so I graduated in June of 2021. And the industry I came from, I worked a bunch of random jobs, honestly. Gas station attendant, Taco Bell shift manager, car salesman. That's the one that broke me. But now, yeah, I'm on my second job, actually. So, yeah, 2 jobs deep and doing well. Still loving it.
Sounds good. How about you, Haley?
I graduated in September of 2022, so about 4 months ago. And I came from a background in customer service. I've been working at Whole Foods Market in the customer service team for 6 years on the same team prior to that, and just needed a change. And I am still currently on the job hunt. Okay.
Well, good luck. Hope you get that job soon.
Thank you.
So where do we start? Let's go ahead and just jump into kind of like, I like asking the question. So you probably did a little coding bootcamp research. You're looking through different programs. Which one should I choose? So you've already decided you're probably going to go to a coding bootcamp. You have some choices. But without knowing what you know now, what made you decide to choose Alchemy and give them a chance? And we'll talk over each other, but anyone is welcome to respond.
I'll start, I suppose. Yeah, for me, it was kind of cut and dry. They accepted the GI Bill, so I was able to put GI Bill towards it and go to school for free. And, they're really high rated. So, I did the interview. I basically experienced all green lights. Everyone was super nice. And yeah, it made the decision pretty easy for me.
Okay.
For me, I knew somebody who had gone through the program, and this was actually before I had decided that I wanted to go to coding school. Was a friend of mine was telling me how amazing their experience had been at Alchemy, how it had changed their life and allowed them to lift themselves out of poverty. And I was seeing the life that they were building for themselves at the time that I met them, and they were just so grateful for their experience and had nothing but good things to say. And so when I found myself figuring out what I wanted to do with my life, I reached out to them and asked about it. And they sent me a link to a Developer 101 course. And then that was when I knew, I do want to go to coding boot camp. And then I did my due diligence, of course, and interviewed other friends and roommates who were in tech who didn't have that same background, things that I should know about coding boot camps, what's important, live teachings versus pre-recorded videos, accessibility of teachers and teaching assistants for support, access to a community that will support me afterwards. And also financially, a big one for me was financial accessibility, because they had scholarships and they had an income share agreement, which without their income share agreement option, I would not have been able to jump in and do it, because I wouldn't have been able to afford it beforehand. So everything just kind of aligned and told me this is the one.
Okay. How about you, Paul?
Yeah, my criteria was basically I wanted a full stack JavaScript stack web development bootcamp with small class sizes and strong ties to the Portland community and area, and Alchemy fit all 3 of those criteria. And I also just went with my gut to a certain extent. I had a good feeling about it. So I guess not everything has to be based on logic, but I knew that they had, solid numbers, a good reputation. So it wasn't too hard of a choice. I think the other choices were Hack Reactor and App Academy, and I heard good things about them, but ultimately Alchemy seemed like the best fit.
Okay. That sounds good. Gut choice. That's interesting. I'm actually curious, Paul, did you get to talk to admissions before you signed up and that's where you got your gut choice, or?
I did. I talked to Megan, who is, I guess, I don't know, that would be like Megan and Marty are the sort of the figureheads of Alchemy. And that reinforced my gut choice because Megan was awesome and I loved everything that she said. Her philosophy of learning and teaching really agreed with mine, and she was just a really nice person. So absolutely.
I felt the exact same. Green lights.
That's good.
Yeah, what I can say, when I talked to Megan, we had our little info session and she was like completely real. She's like, we're not here to like pitch to you. You know, we want to make sure that everybody feels good about the decision that they're making when they sign on. Like, was just really authentic. And I also walked away from that conversation with her already like doing warm introductions for me in emails. Like, she had connected me with 2 other people in an email of people who had a shared passion with me for like astrology, who were wanting to do like astrology applications. And I was like, this is so cool. So
that's interesting.
Yeah, really good vibes.
Was she willing to share emails or contacts with anyone that had a bad experience with the program?
This was before the program. This was before I even started Alchemy. This was my like informational, like, oh, is Alchemy like a program I want to take? So we didn't even have an established relationship at that point. But she was like, oh, tell me a little bit about why you're into coding. Oh, that's really cool. I know some people who are also into that. Here, let me introduce you. And I was like, right from the get-go. Let
me rephrase that. Do you think she's the type of person that's willing to share for prospect students that are kind of trying to figure out if this is the right fit? Because you mentioned like it feels like she felt authentic. She wanted it to be a good fit. So in my eyes, if you had asked her, can I talk to a student that had a bad experience, would she have connected you with that student?
I believe she would.
What about you two?
Yeah, that's the vibe I got generally. Might be a little uncomfortable, sure. But ultimately, yeah, I think so.
You're paying. Go ahead.
I think anyone running a business would probably try to avoid that to some extent as much as they could. But I think if you outright asked, I believe she would. But I don't know because I didn't ask. So.
Okay, fair enough. I understand you guys didn't ask, but I think it's a good question to ask. If you are on the fence, you should get those bad experiences, or at the very least, pull up some reviews. Hey, I heard about this. Can you go ahead and explain the situation? Did you guys improve from it, etc.? I think those are good questions and important questions to ask admissions. Because what is the price of this? Is it like, I might be off. Is it 24,000?
Yeah,
that's a higher
sounds about
price
right.
Coding. Okay. So like that's definitely like the numbers are very much up there. So for a program like this, it's going to charge you that much. I highly recommend students ask those tough questions. You could do it in a friendly way. You can blame it on me. Just, I watched this DonTheDeveloper guy. Like seriously, just put it all on me. But like, I think those are important questions to ask. And we'll go over some of the reviews that I found as well. But what about the curriculum? What do you guys think of that?
Well, it's funny you should ask about the curriculum because the curriculum actually changed partway through my cohort. And I don't think that was any fault of Alchemy. There was a contractual dispute with the provider of their curriculum. And I don't know if that could have been avoided. It's one of those things. And so they had to basically spin up a new curriculum from scratch mid-cohort. And I think they did a good job about that. But the previous curriculum had been basically just like full stack JavaScript. It was solid. I think they covered React very heavily, so a lot of React. That was the big focus. And then the newer curriculum, if I had to say a negative thing about it, it would probably be that they used Supabase instead of SQL in the new curriculum. So I don't know if you're really getting the full stack experience using kind of like a database as a service thing, but other than that, solid.
I think that's a fair assessment. Okay.
Yeah, when I went through, pretty solid. PostgreSQL, React. Obviously, they kind of start you out with the fundamentals of JavaScript. Node, so you get front end, back end, databases, stuff like that. It didn't seem like spectacular in any way. It didn't seem lacking in any way. It ticked all the boxes for full stack development, in my opinion. Maybe low on the data structures and algorithms. Maybe could have been better on that. I think there were some supplemental programs that kind of pittered out that they offered to help with data structures and algorithms. But other than that, nothing really built straight into the curriculum. And that was something I kind of struggled with, like out of the boot camp, having no background with that. So yeah, if there's one thing I could say, it would be that.
Do you feel like it would be wise that students, when they do graduate the program, to supplement that afterwards?
I think immediately. Yeah.
Okay.
Honestly, it's a huge thing. Yeah.
Okay. What do you guys think about the data structures and algorithms thing?
I'll say that by the time that I went through the program, we definitely were doing some data structures and algorithms through each module. Like, it wasn't a heavy focus, but we would have like a week where we were kind of looking at that and like pair programming and trying to like work through like understanding how they work. And I feel like it was pretty well rounded for my cohort, and especially towards like our last module, we delved a little deeper into like recursive functions and stuff. But as far as what I thought about it, to be honest, like that specific aspect of coding makes my head spin. So it was really challenging for me. I was grateful for the exposure. And I also just felt a little bit overwhelmed, like understanding that on top of like all the other things that we were learning.
So,
but it was good.
You, at what module did you start learning recursive functions?
I want to say we first saw recursives in our third module, but I'm not sure about that. We could have potentially seen them sooner, but I don't strictly remember. But somewhere in the middle of the program, I think.
Okay. Okay. Paul, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking, in my opinion, I don't think it's really practical to cover data structures and algorithms like computer science theory in any really solid way during a boot camp. I know that there's incentive to do it because it can help people get past certain job interviews, but I think the time maybe would be better spent focusing on like language fundamentals, like in JavaScript. How does JavaScript really work under the hood a little bit more than just building out React components or whatever? And that was something I thought there could have been more of, where, you talk about data structures and algorithms and code challenges, and people think linked list, binary tree, all this stuff you'll probably never use at your job, but you absolutely will use things at your job, like callback functions and understanding just a little bit about like the JavaScript prototype chain, kind of like these programming fundamentals and language fundamentals. And that's something I think could have been covered more, maybe instead of that smattering of data structures and algorithms, if that makes sense.
I agree with that.
People get out of that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think having a heavier focus of that within the boot camp, and then supplementally as you go through your job search, depending on where you're kind of going, doing the data structures and algorithms. Yeah, I'd say I agree with what Paul said.
Interesting.
I will say, I feel like for me, I'm glad that we focused on it as much as we did, because like in the interviews I have had so far, they have been very focused on that. And I think like there is a value to understanding how to do it in order to like kind of, break into the industry and get a job, because a lot of job interviews are conducted that way. And I don't know that I still struggle with them, but I did get a lot of help from the exercises that we would do in pair programming, where we would like walk through it and we would have to like recreate a pop method without using pop, right? By using like for loops and stuff. And like that really helped the way that I approach those problems and think about them. And I don't know if I would have been able to achieve that had we not done them in the boot camp, like in school together, and like had people to work through them with.
I think that's reasonable. So both are important for different reasons. And so I would argue, so this is a full-time 6-month program, right? Okay. So it's a long program. You have coding boot camps that are 3 months, less than 4 months, that will fit in data structures and algorithms, that will focus on a lot of fundamentals, and they always drop the ball on something. 3 months is not a long time to like condense all this in. And so that's kind of what we're getting at is like, okay, you're starting to try to make the curriculum a little bit more efficient based on what you feel is important in landing a developer their job. So I would argue with reviews that I've seen and with, private messages that people have shared with me, other people have echoed the sentiment that fundamentals was lacking a little bit, where it's like you dive into project work, you get your hands dirty, you get to work with other people, and a lot of people love that about it. But the fundamentals, and even in 2002, it seemed to be lacking a little bit. Whether you replace data structures and algorithms, like that's a really hard decision to make, and maybe supplemental material and courses afterwards is the solution that they should be aiming for. I would also say 6 months is a very long time for a program where most coding boot camps are like 4 months. So I love the length. I think they can fit in both. And I think I've seen data structures and algorithms intertwined, reinforcing fundamental concepts in really good curriculums. I don't think it's easy to do. And I think sometimes coding boot camps will like stuff in like, oh, you got to learn this because you're going to get tested with it. But it's like in this weird way that doesn't really sync well. And like they introduce it too early and people are like, why do I even need to learn this? Right? Like you have to understand these fundamentals very well before you even dive into data structures and algorithms. Otherwise, it's a mess. It's really tough to learn. I can tell you from my experience, I struggled. I probably was the worst at it when I came out of my program. I had to supplement. I'm like, I am going to fail every single interview. The good thing is, as Paul has mentioned, there are companies that you're usually not going to use that in an entry level position. And so like really getting your foundations and fundamentals down, which I did help me along in the interview process. So it's a hard balance. It's a hard balance for sure. I do have a follow-up question, but anything else you want to add about the curriculum before we move on?
Oh, what Haley said may have changed my mind a little bit. I think my position might have been a little bit biased because I tend to do the data structures and algorithms for fun. So I think my perspective might have been a little bit lacking there. So like, thank you, Haley. I think what you said makes sense.
I mean, maybe you found it fun because you had a really good foundation.
Yeah, I think I found foundation background and maybe just that it took me a long time to get over the stigma of like, this is something for academics and realize like anyone can do this. And I want everyone to know that, but that's a big thing and it's hard.
I like it. If you have fun with it, you should explore it. And you're right. Everyone can do it. I'm not even going to get into my rant about CS programs, but you're right. Like anyone can do this. It is an accessible industry as long as you really get a solid foundation down and you understand what employers are hiring for, which is a harder thing to do. And coding boot camps can help guide you with that. But so Haley, you had mentioned recursive functions module 3. How far, I know you were a little unsure about that, but like how many months into the program did you start learning that?
Oh, geez.
Put you on the spot.
That's hard for me to remember.
Was it towards the end or towards the beginning or middle?
I would say it would be middle, somewhere at the middle or after.
Okay. So when I think about, so a very good signal from a program that can produce quality software engineers is a high rejection rate. And I know that sounds weird. And a lot of people that say this industry needs to be more accessible will argue with me, but here's my argument for that. There is nothing accessible about taking someone's money, $24,000. I'm just using this as an example, not saying Alchemy. There's nothing accessible about taking $24,000 from someone and then not preparing them for the actual job market, right? There is so many good things and so many good signals that can come out of saying, hey, before you sign up for this coding bootcamp, try the self-taught path a little bit, figure it out. And we're going to provide you some resources, maybe a little bit of an outline, but I want to see if you even like this, right? We shouldn't bring you in unless you enjoy coding. You want to do this full-time. Like, this is huge. We're asking you to quit your full-time job, your part-time job for this full-time curriculum for 6 months. That's insane, right? And so before we let you in, we're going to have a high rejection rate, and we're going to make sure that you are ready for our program. That's why quality boot camps, when you have that high rejection rate, initially, that's a good signal that produces strong software engineers. And so this is what I've seen across many coding boot camps. So when you mention like recursive functions, usually I would argue higher quality coding boot camps will test that before you even get into the program. Where you're saying they're actually teaching something like that a little bit down the road, which makes sense. So they have a longer curriculum that might be a little bit more beginner friendly, which that can work. I would argue a lot of programs will struggle to keep students on the same trajectory, on the same wavelength, and moving forward together in a cohesive unit. When they accept more people, that is going to have a variety of skill levels. So that's essentially kind of what I figured out from reviewing programs. So let's talk about the application process. Do you feel like it was rigorous? What did they test you over? What do you think of it?
You'll have to forgive me because it's been 2 years since I started.
Sure.
But my understanding is that it was fairly, I wouldn't say rigorous is the word to describe it, but at least in depth, right? So they have the Developer 101, which is, I think, like a week or something, basically a taste of the program. And they say, here, try it. If you like it, then we'll have you commit. We do not want you to commit unless you like it. They pedal that very hard, the Developer 101. They're like, please try it before you buy it, right? There was a lot of pre-work. There was a lot of homework up front. I think they had us they had us set up our environment on our own, obviously pretty straightforward. Complete, I think, a code academy. I don't remember the website, but one of those coding tutoring websites, they had us complete the JavaScript module, do all of this beforehand, several things. I might be stretching my imagination because at the time, to me, it seemed like a little interesting, but it might've been even a month of work or at least 2 weeks of a lot of work before even starting the program. And so, yeah, my recollection of the onboarding process was that it was fairly thorough and, it was in depth.
Okay.
Yeah, that was my experience as well. I feel like at least 20 to 40 hours worth of pre-work, depending on how quickly you can go through that stuff. It was a lot of exercises through Code Academy, and there were some other resources too, like documentation to read. And there was the Dev 101. I don't recall there ever being a placement exam though, or a pass or fail to get in. It was just a lot of exposure. And they did want, they wanted screenshots of us passing 100% each of the modules they had assigned to us in Code Academy. So we did have to demonstrate that we were passing those assignments through Code Academy. And I'm trying to think if there was anything else. That might be it. I don't think I have anything else to add.
So, okay. Interesting. So the pre-work, it sounds like they're trying to set you up a little bit, but they're not really, in my experience, talking with a lot of software engineers, everyone is going to put their own effort into whatever that pre-work is. And you can't trust prospect students to finish the work and do well. You just can't. There are so many people that are going to cut corners. There's so many people that just want to break into this career for the money, right? And they don't even have any enjoyment over it, right? They're just trying to get through it and give me an A to Z solution, get me a job. That's why I'm signing up. I'm giving you money, give me a job for it, right? So there are so many different mindsets. My concern is that I know students do this at every single program. They're going to complete that pre-work, and it probably allows you to retry a couple times. If they're not properly assessing you, like they're not having you do a coding challenge with them, they're not pair programming with you, how are they going to know about your process? How are they going to know, like, how does this person solve a problem that is challenging for them, right? That process, this is why data structures and algorithms is introduced. If you have a consistent rubric on how you grade software engineers, it's not perfect, but you can create a consistent and scalable way to properly assess most software engineers, most good software engineers, and you're going to let a few fall through the cracks. But like examining that process, how someone solves a problem, that's important. It also shows how they're going to handle conflict, how they're going to handle pair programming, like what happens when they get stumped. Do they get pissed off? Like, do they blame someone else because they didn't explain it well enough? Or do they hold themselves accountable for essentially what they can improve? So my concern is that they're not assessing that properly. But that simply means you're probably going to have a little bit more of a variety of skill levels going into the program. And then they have to figure out what to do with that from there. So do you feel like I'm just going to share that. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would. Oh, sorry, Paul. You go ahead.
Oh, okay. Oh, thanks, Haley. I think I tend to agree with Don that maybe the screening process could be more thorough. But I'm also torn because, for example, I have a coworker who went through the program, zero experience going in, didn't know anything, and now he's killing it, doing great. So I guess there is that risk of, do you end up screening out people who, through the proper nurturing or whatever, will do really well, who wouldn't have made it on their own? So yeah, I'm torn. I don't know. I don't know what their screening process is like other than the pre-work, because in my opinion, the pre-work is not even a screening process. You can just kind of like brute force your way through it. So I don't know what they're doing on the back end to investigate whether people are likely to succeed.
Okay.
What I will say, just with what like my thoughts and feelings are about, like, I like that it's not super exclusive. Like, I like that if somebody wants to get into the program and they're willing to do the work, that they have the ability to do that. And I think in a way it kind of like speaks to the confidence of the program, because like, they're putting out there what their hiring ratings are for people who complete the program. So if they're able to bring in people with all of these like varieties of backgrounds and no experience at all, and they're able to like put them through this like 6-month program and help them get a job, like I think there's something to be said about that too. And there was a variety of experiences. I do remember in my cohort feeling like there were some people who were just like wizards, like math wizards, and I was like, holy cow, how am I going to keep up with this? And at the same time, I feel like they had a really I appreciated their approach to it, because they were always giving us, we always had plenty to work on, but they were also always giving stretch goals. Like, they had a pretty extensive list of stretch goals that they would give to the more advanced students. So it felt like everybody was still getting enough to chew on and to learn, and that nobody was necessarily like some people were like too overwhelmed and couldn't keep up, or that some people like weren't getting enough for their money, if that makes sense. Like, it felt pretty well balanced, like given the different experiences that we had.
Stretch goals are good. Okay. What do you think, Cameron?
Yeah, it was a long 6 months. So I'm just trying to digest my feelings, try to recall some of those things. Definitely beginner friendly is the word I would use. Okay. Beginner friendly, but also, it was a hard program, at least for me, right? I didn't have any experience going in. So it's 40 hours a week, and that's 40 hours a week, if I remember correctly, of, lecture and lab, 40 hours a week, then homework, right? If I remember correctly. So a bit more than full-time. For 6 months, you are revectoring your life completely. It is a large commitment. And I think they focused more on the individual's temperament, as a human being, their tenacity, right, versus necessarily technical expertise. And, if you're the type of individual who will commit for 6 months, 40 plus hours a week, I think you're going to do well. And the people who were committed and were self-motivated, right? I mean, there's some supplementation you can have through the program, but I noticed that it was the self-motivated individuals who succeeded. And Alchemy seemed to, at least in my cohort, attract that sort of individual. So it was, most people were self-motivated, willing, and really, really hungry to learn. And there was enough to learn, like Haley had mentioned. So,
why do you think Alchemy attracted that type of individual?
Yeah, that's, I don't know, kind of ephemeral. Kind of comes back to the gut feeling. There's a large community surrounding Alchemy, and I think the community in general is always very supportive and like-minded in that sense. There's a large community, very community oriented. So I'd say that's where it comes from. The community kind of fosters that. Plus the type of people who are going to go through like a rigorous coding boot camp, in my opinion, tend to be those sorts of individuals, self-motivated. So.
Okay. What do you think of the instructors?
I really enjoyed the instructors, to break the silence. Super pleasant, really attentive, great individuals as well as instructors. I went on to work with one of the instructors at my first company, and that was awesome. So it comes back to kind of the community oriented thing, but the quality of the instructors, I think was really good.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll second that. They are really quality human beings. They also had a great sense of humor. And not once was I made to feel stupid for a question that I asked. I feel like I was one of the people who was always asking questions in class, because I'm like, what does this mean? What does that mean? What are you doing there? I was like, what, just taking it all in. And they always welcomed my questions, answered them, that took them seriously, and would draw out diagrams. If I had to ask, is there any chance you could make a bullet point list of what we went through to help recap for myself? They would accommodate that. They really were supportive of, whatever we needed. I really enjoyed my experience, and I feel like it was a really healthy learning environment. It felt different from standard K through 12 education, where it's very, there's a specific structure that's power over and not good, and listen to teacher, but they were really encourage discussion, and it felt really great. It was a really great learning environment.
Okay. Good for you for asking questions, by the way. Not enough people do.
Thank you.
How about you?
I thought, thanks. I thought the instructors were good. I think when Alchemy goes to hire instructors, I get the strong feeling that they focus more on the relatability side, the human side. Not to say they're not technically proficient. They all are. They hire qualified software engineers, people who know what they're doing, but in their personalities and their teaching, it's definitely more focused on the relating than these are the technical steps, which of course they also cover. And I think that just fits with the overall culture of the bootcamp, where the focus is more on collaboration and people stuff, maybe than the very technicals, something like Codesmith or something, to give an example where it's contrast there. Not saying one's better than the other. That's just how I perceived it.
Sure. Makes sense. I got startled. In my recording software, there's an alert. So if I get a donate or if I get like a follow or something like that, I hear this alert go off and it spooks me every time because it's still Halloween alert. And it just went off and I'm trying to identify where it is. I cut all my scenes out. So anyways, anyone that's listening, watching, that's what that was. Okay. It sounds like they bring in instructors that are very nurturing, that care, that have a good sense of humor, that are, they make you feel welcome and asking questions, because that's one of the best things that you can do, especially if you're spending $24,000, right? So I make this argument all the time. There are stupid questions in the world. I've never heard a stupid question asked at a coding bootcamp. Just because you don't know something does not mean you shouldn't ask it. And most people, they are like, if you ask a question, others have that question, they're just not brave enough to ask. I think it's a good habit to build up. And I saw you like shaking your head, Karen, when she was talking about it. Like, it's important to ask those questions, right?
Huge. Yeah. And they were good about that.
Good. How big were your cohorts?
I was actually going to say, my cohort was about 50 people. So
wow.
big cohort, right? And that sometimes made it a little difficult. So while the instructors were great and the TAs were great, sometimes asking those questions was like maybe a tomorrow thing. And it seemed that you have to be kind of the bold individual or the kind of, like I said, self-motivated individual to kind of get the instructor time. That was my personal experience with a large cohort. But yeah, pretty large. Sometimes there was a bit of competition.
Sure. I can see that. I mean, that's a very large class size. What about you two?
14 people, I believe. There's a lot of seasonal variation, I think, at class size. I was the summer, June cohort, so I think that's probably a big part of it.
Okay. How about you, Haley?
My cohort was 16 people, so also pretty small. It felt like a good size. I can't imagine 50. That sounds like a lot, Cameron. I can't even imagine. Yeah, I feel like asking questions. I feel like my experience asking questions would also look different in a cohort of that size.
Yeah, I just double checked. The Slack channel has 47 people, so including instructors, probably like 45, so approximately 50.
Okay, so you did bring this up when I reached out to you. Yeah, in personal, felt like there was competition. You had also mentioned, you want to talk about the high school thing?
Oh, yeah. And this isn't to like say it's a bad thing, but for my personality, I am inherently a very like introverted individual. So sometimes it felt like a little bit cliquey. And then when it was time to break off and do the like the collaborative work, I was like, I'm not really fitting into a particular clique. Like, how do I navigate this social atmosphere? It's kind of lame to say that I was experiencing that, right? But I don't know, it did feel like a little bit like high school with such a large cohort. And I was like, I'm having to navigate these like social things. So yeah, that was just a little bit of my experience. It wasn't bad. Like, I connected with a lot of people like really, really well. That was one thing that actually stood out to me, is everyone's willingness to connect and be open with strangers, basically. But at times I was like, this is socially taxing as well as technically like taxing. So yeah.
Okay. That's a unique experience. I'm glad you shared it. I felt like that in college. I felt like that at my coding boot camp. I am someone that very much used to be introverted. I tell people all the time, they don't believe me. I still am. Like, my energy gets sucked out of me when I'm in huge groups all the time. And right. So, and I even have techniques to manage my mental energy when I'm doing live streams. And so I do my best to do that, but that's important. And I think that's also common. And I almost hope they didn't hold your hand to be able to solve that problem, because that's a problem you have to solve on your own, and you will deal with that in the workplace, you know?
I was about to say, since you started that, I was like, it has helped me navigating both of my jobs, and especially the second one. The second one is a lot more business integrated than my first one. So I'm talking to like a fair amount of business people in my day-to-day, and navigating these different segmented parts of the organization. So yeah, since you mentioned that, it did help, I think, kind of teach me that skill. So
good. I'm glad to hear that. What do you think of the career services?
I think it's really supportive. It's pretty extensive, like going through 6 months, and like we were connected with career services, like from module 1, although like the work that we were doing with them, like started off small, like, you know, here's a resume template, like get some drafts in, you know, like create a LinkedIn account. And like we would build on that throughout the program. But we covered a lot, like not only like resumes and LinkedIn, but like being connected with other people in the community, like alums, like for advice on what their experience was like what was challenging for them while they were in the program, what their experience was like getting a job, and like, you know, encouragement. Like we were required to schedule networking events and like to make new connections consistently. Like towards the end, like our last module, like we were being asked to make 5 new LinkedIn connections every week and attend at least 3 networking events like before the module was over. So we had the whole module, but like they really emphasized the importance of networking. They talked about different tips for it, depending on whether you are introverted or extroverted, like to find a buddy or like to find an online event. And like, even after graduating the program, career services is still very like connected and like checks in and like offering resources for support along the job hunt.
Okay.
Has been my experience.
I didn't interact a lot with career services post bootcamp because I ended up getting a job fairly quickly. But my experience of them, like, because career services kind of like, you have things that don't happen very often early on, and then it kicks in more and more. And then the final week of the program is purely career services. Well, my experiences was that they were helpful. You know, the like standard career services stuff, help you get your resume looking nice, advice on networking. If there was one thing that was a little bit iffy for me, there was a lot of employee turnover in the career services department while I was there. And I mean, I'm not privy to the why. It could be coincidence. I have no idea, but it was a little confusing because at any given time it was kind of like, who is this person again? It's now this person. Who am I supposed to talk to? Who's in charge of what? So maybe that was just a fluke with my cohort, but that was a thing. But overall, yeah, solid. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll second on the turnover thing. Thankfully, I had the same career services individual, but I experienced some instructor turnover during my cohort, and with a large cohort, it was a little bit bumpy. But as far as the career services, honestly, it was great. And it should be great because it behooves them to, you know, have you land a job and to have them provide you with the resources to land a job. So their numbers are great. Yeah, I worked with one career services person. She was amazing. She actually specifically landed me my first job, you know, warm introduction, helped facilitate that. So I mean, it worked out for me. All of the resources were great, in my opinion, you know, resume workshops, LinkedIn, stuff like that. High focus on networking. So, yeah.
Okay. Sounds pretty solid. I've heard a bit of turnover from people that have graduated earlier than you, Haley. I get this gut feeling like even just looking at some reviews of like people pissed off at the program. YouTube, please don't demonetize me. People that are angry at the program. A lot of it was like turnover. A lot of it was curriculum stuff. I didn't really see anything mentioned about career services. There was some discrepancies about or not discrepancies, but variety of skill levels that made it a little bit more difficult. But I mainly people would echo the sentiment of turnover. Like it really screwed up their cohort and made it much, much more difficult than it needed to be. So I'm saying this because I'm hoping they got some of those things resolved. Sometimes it's hard to figure out that turnover, but sometimes it's difficult to figure that out. Instructors can leave. It's hard to vet instructors sometimes. Maybe they're not doing a good enough job vetting instructors to be able to look at longevity and a really good cultural fit with the program. Maybe they are, but I think it's still recent enough where people should be a little cautious about that turnover. And I think it's okay to ask how long your instructor's been there. Get to know your instructor, talk to your instructor, ask your instructor questions. If they're not even willing to do that, that's a red flag in my opinion. So I talk to admissions, talk to the instructor. You're paying a lot of money for this. So I would just have that conversation with them. And even outcomes, sir.org is down. Do you guys know what sir.org is? Okay. The general advice that I give, don't ever trust self-claimed outcomes ever. Always ask for a third party vetted. So ask what third party, what maybe a financial institution vetted their outcomes. I've seen so many outcomes in marketing materials that are just slightly different that kind of make you feel like, 80% of software engineers are getting a job after a program. 80% of people that use tech skills. Okay, right. And it's easy to read that stuff and just have a very different image in your mind, which sir.org is a really good standard. It requires coding bootcamps to, it basically has a high bar for integrity to submit your outcomes. I would have loved to check if those outcomes were submitted, and the site is down. So we're going to skip that portion. I feel like we went over a lot of what I went through. When I look at reviews, some of them just seem personal. I actually want to kind of defend Alchemy a little bit. Some of these reviews, you have to, if you just see nothing but 5 stars, it's false. It doesn't give you an accurate representation of the program. That's just my experience. And also, if you see a 1-star, people just venting because they had a really bad experience, they probably got into some argument with the instructor. That's a very personal thing, and you have to take that with a grain of salt as well. So try to look for 2 to 4-star reviews or people that aren't making it so personal. And I think that's going to give you more of a information that's going to resemble most likely what you're going to experience at the program. Because I am seeing kind of a mix of reviews. But that's it. I asked a lot of questions. So before we end this and do our outros, what could they improve? Let's talk about constructive criticism. And feel free to think about it. No program is.
I think.
Go ahead.
Sorry. If there's just one thing that I keep coming back to, it's the fundamentals. I really think in 6 months, I agree with you. People shouldn't be going out the door without understanding of things like function scope or whatever. I mean, I don't even know if that's. I'm just thinking of like JavaScript, if language of choice is JavaScript, whatever, just things like flow control, logically how data flows through a program, how functions work, how scope works, stuff like that. Programming fundamentals should be covered more solidly. If that's one thing I would focus on. 6 months, that should happen.
It's good feedback.
I'll echo that. There's a lot of self-study involved, I think, for me personally, to help get up to that level of confidence for hireability. I think some refining of the curriculum, and to Haley's point, it seems like they may be refining that over time. Other than that, maybe a bit more stringent on those class sizes, being a bit more selective. It seemed, my understanding was that there may have been just like staffing, like they had to, put all 50 in this one particular cohort. I don't know, maybe it was atypical. I can't speak to their numbers, but that did make it a little more difficult. But again, double-edged sword, did learn a lot of social stuff, but other than that, nothing much else to say. The turnover, but that was already mentioned. So.
Okay. It's good feedback.
Yeah, I guess one thing would be a little more driving home of the test-driven development. I mean, that is something they do strongly emphasize throughout the program. But I feel when it was introduced to us in the beginning, it was presented to us. And I think as a bunch of newbies, we were all kind of overwhelmed and confused about how it worked. And then it was sort of just set aside for that module so that we could kind of focus on developing other technical skills. And it did come back in later modules, but I feel it would have been helpful for me to kind of really strengthen that routine of writing the testing, because then I knew this is something that's important that I should be doing, but it also wasn't having that reinforced accountability for doing it in the beginning, and it was sort of just remembering later on that we would need to do it.
For me, they were really anal about that. I feel the TAs and the instructors, they really drove that home, at least for our cohort. I was scared when I was I forgot to write a test. No.
That's interesting. Okay. I think within 6 months, that's perfectly doable. I think that's good feedback. Haley, you had mentioned, I didn't really hear you talk about it, but you had mentioned that you, your least favorite part was observing some shifts in staffing. Did you experience that?
I think it was just kind of echoing what Cameron and Paul had expressed, where it's I don't feel I was too strongly affected. None of my instructors left in the middle of a module or anything. So I did have that consistency. But I just, I knew that there was an instructor teaching a different cohort ahead of us that had left. And so that meant that we would not have that instructor. We would have a different instructor, but it didn't really interrupt what we were doing. It was more just that's different. I wonder how that's going to compare, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. Okay. A little jarring, not necessarily a negative experience.
Yeah.
Okay. You'd mentioned also with the curriculum flow.
That was because when one of the instructors left, there was a brief merging of cohorts. So two cohorts, we would take modules in different orders so that when the instructor switch happened, our education would still be how do I explain it? We took I don't really know how to explain it, other than just it switched the order of the modules that we were taking, advanced full stack, right after learning React versus splitting, having learning backend and SQL in the middle of that. So some cohorts got to learn the advanced full stack right after learning React, and it was all really fresh and they could remember that really well. And then our cohort learned SQL in the middle, front end, back end, and then advanced full stack. And I think there were different benefits for each cohort as to whether that was helpful or not, but it's all I don't know. like negligible differences. I feel like we still have the same modules.
I appreciate you sharing that. I would argue that's not negligible. I find that there is a difference in quality of programs and that flow matters big time. It sounds like they probably just adapted with the turnover as much as they could, right? They did the best they could, and that's fine. I would argue that's going to be relevant to your experience as a student, and I would challenge the longevity of the instructors there. So if that's still happening recently, I think that's worth a question to admissions. Challenge them on that. Like, these are all things, like we mentioned several things that you should be challenging admissions on. Like, ask these questions. You're paying a lot of money for this. I think it's relevant. I'm glad you didn't have like a terrible experience and you kind of flowed with it. I've met a lot of students that haven't had that great of an experience when that flow is altered. Okay, that's pretty much it. Got to do my critical thing, of course. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. Is there like anything major you think we should add, or do we pretty much cover everything? Pretty much covered everything? Okay, cool. Let's end it there. Before we do end it, I like to do my outros. And seriously, thank you so much for coming on. Those watching, I always get a mixed bag of feedback. I'm meant to be critical. That's literally my brand. So I'm sure I'm going to get some DMs and emails my way, and that's okay. But Paul, if people want to reach out to you and anything else you want to shout out, where could they reach you?
You can reach me on LinkedIn, Paul Brubaker. Don't really have anything to shout out. Just I think that if you want to be a software developer, you should absolutely do it. It's awesome.
Cool. How about you, Cameron?
Same deal. Yeah, hit me up on LinkedIn, Cameron Zimmerman. Set up a coffee chat. Let's talk. I'd love to, talk to you about my experience. I think everyone who is a diligent worker is capable of being a software engineer. So go ahead, do it.
Love it. How about you, Haley?
Yeah, to reach out to me, you can find me on LinkedIn at Haley Steinecke. And yeah, happy to connect with anybody who wants to talk more about my experience, ask questions. I also fully support anybody pursuing software development who doesn't come from a technical background. Sounds good. All right. Well, that's it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Feel free to let me know what you think in the comments if you're watching this on YouTube. And I challenge graduates, students to share feedback. Because every single program I look at, it's all 5 stars. That's just not true. It's not true. So I think coding boot camps, I still think in terms of alternative education, coding boot camps are your best shot at getting a developer position. And so, but we also have to hold these coding boot camps accountable for a lot of their marketing materials. We have to hold them accountable for different practices. So please share constructive criticism in the comments. Just make sure it's constructive. But yeah, that's it. Paul, Cameron, Haley, thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Thank you.